You ever feel that punch in your chest when someone calls you out in public, when they twist your words, smear your name, and suddenly, it's not about what's true, it's about who speaks first, and you feel it, that pressure to say something, to clear the air, to make them see you're not what they said. So you jump in, defend, explain, overcorrect, thinking you're saving your dignity, but deep down, you know something just cracked. Because no matter how calm you speak, how right you are, once you explain, you're on trial. You've stepped into their frame, you've told the world, without saying it, I need you to believe me, and that is where power dies. So maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous move isn't to prove you're good, it's to say nothing at all. Most people think they're being reasonable when they defend themselves, that it's logical, that it shows clarity, but it doesn't. It shows panic. It shows need, and in the game of power, need is weakness dressed as honesty. When you explain yourself, you're not just clarifying. You're silently admitting something darker, that someone else's opinion of you matters more than your control. That their narrative has teeth. You want to believe you're setting the record straight. But that record, it's not even yours anymore. The moment you defend, the rules are no longer in your hands, because you accepted their terms. You gave their words weight, and worse, you gave up your own mystery, and power lives inside mystery. People don't respond to logic, they respond to presence, to the unshaken, the unreadable, the ones who don't flinch when poked. Not because they're numb, but because they're untouchable. Imagine this, you're in a meeting, someone says, I'm not sure your plan really works. And you lean forward, you explain, you give context, you prove you thought it through, they nod. But in their head, they've already seen what they needed to see. You reacted, you cared. You just showed them they got under your skin. You may have explained your logic, but you just lost your edge. Now picture the same moment. But instead of leaning in, you lean back. You don't smile, you don't shift, you just let the air stretch. And then calmly say, interesting, let's hear yours. And now they're on stage, now they're performing, now they're under scrutiny. Because you didn't chase approval, you redirected attention. That's not defense, that's dominance. The truth is, defense always feels right in the moment. That's what makes it seductive. You want to believe your words can fix perception. But perception doesn't bend to truth. It bends to force, to control, to who owns the frame. Every time you say, let me explain, what you're really saying is, I've lost the frame, but maybe if I plead hard enough, I'll get it back, but you won't. Because now they've seen you bleed, and once they see blood, they stop hearing words, they start smelling weakness. Silence isn't retreat, it's a move, one of the oldest, one of the coldest, and when used right, one of the most terrifying. We've been trained to fill space, to fix discomfort, to explain away tension, but the most powerful people you've ever met, they don't fill the silence, they let it grow, they let it stretch until it swallows the room. Because silence, when held with presence, becomes pressure, it makes people squirm, it makes them guess. And in the guessing, they start writing stories about you, not soft ones, sharp ones, dangerous ones. And that's where your power begins, not in being liked, but in being unclear. Let me tell you about Claire. She's a CEO, East Coast, mid-40s, brilliant, not flashy, but when she walks into a room, something shifts. It's not her voice. She barely talks, but everyone watches what she might say, because she never explains, never defends. Even when the press tried to smear her after a controversial deal, she said nothing, no tweets, no interviews, no clarifications. And because of that, the story turned quickly. People started asking, why isn't she responding? What does she know that we don't? Is this silence, confidence, or threat? And that's the magic. The moment you go silent, people project strength onto you, because their mind can't sit in uncertainty. So it fills in the blanks, and the blanks they fill are often more powerful than anything you could say. Silence doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've chosen not to flinch. It means you know your worth, and you're not here to auction it to anyone cheap enough to bait you. The world listens closely to those who speak rarely, but even more closely to those who don't speak at all. Because when you hold your tongue, you hold your edge, and when you hold your edge long enough, you don't have to fight for presence anymore. You become it. There's a tactic most people never see coming, because it doesn't look like a move. It looks like nothing, no defense, no counterattack, just stillness, but behind that stillness is a shift. A flip where you're no longer the target, they are. It starts the moment you stop trying to correct them. When someone throws shade, says something calculated, and you don't push back, you don't even blink. Instead, you turn it into a mirror, you let their words float, you let the silence stretch, and when you finally speak, you don't defend yourself. You reflect them, gently, precisely, like this. Your coworker says, you always make things about you. You pause, just enough for the room to notice, then calmly, you ask, is that how you feel today? That sentence hits harder than any rebuttal ever could, because it flips the focus. Now, they're the emotional one. The one who seems reactive. You've shifted the energy from accusation to exposure, from defense to spotlight. It's not sarcasm. It's not passive aggression. It's surgical calm, and that calm makes people second guess their approach. David knew this. He's a litigation consultant, brilliant under pressure. And during one high-stakes negotiation, another attorney took a cheap shot in front of everyone. Maybe if you understood the terms better, we wouldn't be here. Everyone looked at David, waiting. He didn't explain. He didn't push back. He simply raised his eyebrows, tilted his head, and said, interesting, was that for me or for the room? Of silence, then shifting, then discomfort. Because suddenly, the room wasn't watching David anymore, they were watching the one who attacked. Wondering if he'd just exposed something in himself, and that's the frame flip. Once you stop trying to be right, you start being in control. Not of facts, of perception, and in the world of power, perception is the currency. They want you to react. Because if you do, they win, but if you don't, if you stay composed, then they start unraveling. Their tone rises, their face tightens, their words repeat, and without touching them, without saying anything cruel, you've just handed them the rope. People don't remember the first insult, they remember who stayed calm, and who didn't. There's a silence deeper than not responding. It's the kind where you're not just quiet, you're gone, you don't explain, you don't post, you don't reply. You simply disappear, and that absence, held with intention, becomes unbearable, but not for you, for them. Because most people don't attack you to destroy you, they attack you to feel seen, to get a response, even a negative one. Just something that proves you're still tied to their emotion. When you vanish, when you refuse to play the emotional ping-pong, they're left playing with shadows, and that's when they start talking to themselves. They repost, they rephrase. They reach out to others, they circle back again and again, hoping something, anything, will pull you back into their orbit. But all they get is silence, cold, heavy, loud. Sophia understood this. She was a mid-level influencer. One night, another creator accused her of copying content. She didn't comment, she didn't subtweet, she didn't release a statement. She went offline, and within days, the accuser started unraveling more stories, more accusations, lives, threads. Their energy exploded outward, while Sophia's absence grew heavier by the hour. A week later, people stopped talking about the accusation and started asking what was wrong with the person who kept posting. Because that's what happens when you remove your presence, you reveal theirs, and most people aren't ready to be seen that clearly. Because when the noise comes from one side only, the world starts listening differently. It stops being a conflict and becomes a spectacle. Your stillness becomes their mirror, and some people can't handle their own reflection. We live in a world addicted to emotional reaction, to instant feedback, to being heard, especially when angry. So when you don't give them what they expect, they spiral, because without your reaction, they lose their script. Without your attention, they lose their rhythm, and without your presence, they lose their power. The loudest collapse is the one that echoes in silence, and you didn't even need to lift a finger. Here's what separates tacticians from artists. Tacticians avoid reacting, but artists, they flip the entire narrative. They don't just refuse to defend themselves, they make the accusation look like weakness, like insecurity dressed as criticism. When someone calls you arrogant, most people rush to soften it. I didn't mean to come off that way. Or worse, I'm just confident, not arrogant. But when you respond like that, you've already lost. You've accepted their frame, you've entered their reality. But there's another way. Someone says, you're arrogant. You tilt your head, hold eye contact, and say, strange how confidence makes people so uncomfortable. And then silence. What happens next is predictable. They fumble, they get louder or quieter. Either way, they feel exposed. Because you didn't play defense, you used their move against them, and that kind of inversion. It disorients people. This is what David did. He was accused of being manipulative by a former colleague during a podcast interview. It wasn't even subtle. The host leaned in and said, some people say you know how to twist a room. David smiled, just enough, then looked past the host and said, only people who can't influence tend to say that. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't cruel, it was clean. Cold, final. That one sentence shattered the room, because it revealed the insecurity behind the jab, and that's the art. To reverse not just the words, but the energy, so that they're suddenly the ones explaining themselves, backpedaling, proving. Bleeding, this isn't cruelty, it's control. You're not attacking, you're just not catching what they throw. And when you stop catching, their attacks fall flat, they echo, they bounce, and eventually they turn inward. Because people don't want to look bitter, they don't want to seem petty, and when you don't react, they begin to question whether they just expose themselves instead of you. You can't defend your way into strength, you reverse your way into power. Not by saying, I'm not what you think, but by calmly asking, why does that bother you so much? Because the truth is, their words often say less about you, and far more about the parts of themselves they haven't made peace with yet. You don't need to block the sword if they can't reach you. That's the shift, when you realize their attack only lands if you step into the strike. But what if you don't move? What if you let them swing and hit nothing? The world teaches you to respond, to protect your image, to clarify, to balance, to smooth the tension, but that instinct, to explain, to clean up, keeps you in the fight. And every time you engage, even just to make things clear, you've chosen to get hit. But power doesn't dodge, it absorbs nothing, it simply stands. Imagine a business meeting, you're presenting your vision. Someone interrupts, tries to undercut you, says, you always come with these bold ideas, but are they even practical? Now the average person leans forward, starts listing stats, case studies, past wins, all valid, all reactive, but you. You lean back, you pause, you let the room sit in the silence that follows their jab. And then you say with a calm voice, let's hear your strategy. Then, and now, the light shifts, the pressure pivots, suddenly, everyone is looking at them. That's not defense, that's redirection. When you don't flinch, you make the attacker prove themselves. You flip the dynamic without aggression, and in doing so, you expose what they never expected to reveal, their own unpreparedness. See, the more someone wants you to react, the more they need your energy to feel powerful. They're throwing words like hooks, hoping you'll bite, but when you don't, when you just watch, composed and unshaken, they lose rhythm. Because silence from the confident is louder than rage from the insecure, it makes people feel judged without a single word. And not in a cruel way, in a surgical one, because power isn't about making others look small. It's about refusing to shrink yourself. Even in romantic relationships, the same rule applies. Your partner says, you don't care about me anymore, and instinctively, your heart jumps. You want to say, of course I do. You want to rush in, fix it, soothe it, but that urgency, it validates the emotional frame. Instead, you breathe, let it hang, and then say calmly, that's not how I see it. And no defense, no escalation, just control of the emotional tempo. And whoever controls the tempo controls the room. It's not about silence for the sake of ego. It's about holding ground so deeply, so calmly, that their storm breaks against you, and you don't even bend. Most people think reputation is about being liked, about being clean, agreeable, understood, but in the real world, that kind of reputation is fragile, too easy to shatter, too dependent on approval. What you need isn't a good reputation. You need a strong one. A strong reputation doesn't beg, it doesn't explain, it doesn't flex for the crowd, it just is solid, heavy, clear, like a locked vault with no labels on the outside. And when people don't know what's inside, they don't test it, they respect it, or they fear it. That's what happens when you stop defending yourself, you stop participating in their trials, you stop handing out explanations like flyers. And people begin to ask, not do I like this person, but how close should I stand to this person? Oh, that's presence, that's leverage, because a good reputation needs upkeep, but a strong one, it keeps itself, just by being unmoved. Remember this, the more you explain, the more questions you invite, and the more questions you answer, the smaller you seem. Even when you're right, but when you leave the answer hanging, when you let them wonder. Your name starts to grow in their mind, not for what you said, but for what you didn't say. In a crowded room, someone says, he always thinks he's above everyone. You could laugh, you could say something clever. Or you could just pause, glance across the table, and say nothing. That pause says more than a paragraph. It says, I don't need this space. It says, you just showed your hand. And it says, without saying it, be careful who you try to touch. In the digital world, this works even faster. Someone calls you toxic, controlling, fake. You don't post a thread. You don't make a statement. You post one line. People always call you dangerous when they can't control you. That's not defense. That's a mirror, and when people read it, they don't think he's clearing his name. They think, maybe he's not the one who's scared, because strong doesn't mean perfect. Strong means untouchable, not because nothing's thrown at you, but because nothing lands. There's a moment when your silence doesn't just protect you, it elevates you. When people stop seeing your quiet as hesitation, and start seeing it as calculation, that's the turn. That's when you become something more than just respected. You become untouchable, because when you don't defend, people start defending you, not because you asked, not because you posted a plea, but because silence, when held right, triggers something primal, a discomfort, a gap that needs filling. And suddenly, the crowd steps in. She didn't even respond, and they're still going at her. He hasn't said a word. This feels personal now. And without lifting a finger, you shift the narrative, not by proving your innocence, but by becoming the one who never needed to. That's the paradox. The more you fight to explain, the more alone you look. But the more you stay composed, the more people step in, because humans hate imbalance, and when one side is calm and the other is spinning, the crowd senses it. Power isn't loud, it's atmospheric. It changes the room before you even speak. And when others try to drag you down into the noise, and you don't move, people begin to ask why. And in that question, your myth begins, because silence leaves space, and space gets filled with story, with doubt, with wonder. And people don't respect what they understand, they respect what they can't quite define. That's why the most powerful people don't correct the record, they let it bend, let it twist, let it stretch itself into silence. And in that space, they build something no argument can destroy: reputation by mystery. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being unbothered by design, choosing stillness, choosing clarity. And knowing that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is absolutely nothing, not in fear, but in total control. There comes a point when you stop trying to manage how people see you, you stop playing the game of defense and explanation. You stop chasing reputation like a prize, because the truth is, the most powerful presence in any room isn't the loudest, it's the one who never needs to be validated. When you don't defend, when you don't correct, when you let your name float without trying to steer it, that's when you cross into something few ever reach. You become the definition, your posture defines your truth. Your calm defines your credibility, your silence defines your danger, and people feel it, not in their heads, in their gut, because they can't place you, can't predict you, can't get a grip on how to move you, so they stop trying. They adjust to you instead. You're no longer reacting to the room. You've become the reason the room reacts. That's what happens when you master restraint, when you let others swing, scream, twist, panic, and you stay unmoved, not passive, not numb, but anchored, unshakable. The world isn't built for that kind of power. That's why it works. Because people who don't know how to provoke you, they fear you, and not in the theatrical sense. In the quiet, cautious, I don't want to be on the wrong side of this sense, you stop being part of the chaos. You become the stillness people orbit. From now on, don't fight to be understood. Train yourself to be unshakable. Don't live in defense. Live in definition. Let your silence make the noise. Let your presence be the statement. And let the world learn that some people don't play the game because they are the game.